Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on awards entries for 2016. We're joining Sean Grant, longtime New South Wales Councillor and Judge of the AMI Awards, and also Monty Rossier, Nicole Jenkins, and Philip Stork, which Sean will introduce later. So my name is Rania, and I'm Marketing and Communications Specialist at the AMI. And I'd just like to go through a couple of things before we get started, just to make sure that your experience is as seamless as possible. Okay, so we've held the awards for marketing excellence for 34 years now, since 1982, and it's been a great success. We've seen a lot of great campaigns flow in through the years. Last year we had Just for Pets, who was a much smaller business, who won Campaign of the Year, and amongst, some of the big dogs as well, such as Coca-Cola. So a couple of changes have been made in 2016. We have added 10 new categories to the awards. Some of them have been renamed, but they still have the same criteria. So it is worth looking at the categories on our website or on our eAwards platform, where you go to enter your entry. The actual gala dinner will be on the 19th of October in Sydney. And this year, because we've got an increased number of categories, we also have an increased number of judges. So that's actually at 110 at the moment, whereas last year we were at about 60. So one other thing as well is that we will be holding state awards. So anyone that goes into the running for national awards will automatically be placed in the state awards. Obviously, winners of the national award won't go into the running for a winning state award. So as mentioned before, we do have 28 categories, 10 of which are new. Some of those include export marketing, customer experience marketing, and please excuse the formatting. We had some issues, which was why we're a bit late logging in. And some of the other new categories include tourism marketing, mobile marketing. Obviously, marketing is constantly changing, so we need to keep up with the times. And I'd like to also remind each of you that we do have our special award categories. We've had, obviously, Marketing Team of the Year is something quite new for 2016. And in the past, we've had Sir Charles McGrath previous winners such as Lorna Inman and Lorna Jane Clarkson in 2014. And CPM, Certified Practicing Marketer Awards, who have previously won, such as Caroline Patrick and Nick Baker, who is now CEO of Red Balloon, I believe. And in terms of the Future Leader Award, it's a really exciting prize for upcoming marketers, especially since the prize is up to the value of $5,000 for professional development of the winner's choice. So really something to look into. If you know anybody who would suit and nominate themselves, let them know. So let's move on to the awards criteria. Obviously, there's a structure in terms of how each entry is marked, which you can see is marked out clearly there. Now, our panel will also give you a little bit of feedback in terms of judging and tips as well. So this year we have our eAwards platform is the main portal for entering awards, and as well as payment, and also has all the information up there. So do visit the eAwards website, create your profile. You can start on your entry, you can pay for it at the same time as well, or you can also continue to update your entry even after you've paid, so that's really important. And just remember, entries close on the 3rd of June, so you can edit up until that point. So just in terms of timing, as I mentioned, 3rd of June, we are closing award nominations. June and August is when the judging will happen once nominations are closed. And in September, our finalists will be announced for the big event on the 19th of October. And then, of course, in November and December, we will be holding functions to present some of those state winners. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Sean into the webinar. Sean, welcome.
Thank you.
So Sean has been a long-time judge for the Awards for Marketing Excellence and has also participated on our state committee as well in New South Wales, and he'll be introducing the rest of the panel.
Great. Thanks, Rania. And hopefully people are seeing a slide called Our Panel. We seem to have been a bit let down by the slide technology, so apologies for that. If you're not seeing that, don't worry. The bulk of what we're talking about is audio anyway, so hopefully we can either sort that out or we'll just proceed with the audio as we go. The panel today is, I'm joined by 3 people. Firstly, Monzi Rossier of BWM Dentsu, a 3-time winner from last year. Nicole Jenkins from the Hub Marketing Communications, who won 1 category, and Philip Stork from Queensland Health Department, who was also a winner in a category. I'm going to introduce them all properly now and throw a few questions to them from my side, and then we'll go into the awards criteria after that. So if I could go in order here, Monzi Rossier, first of all, Planning Director at BWM Dentsu, winner in 3 categories, or BWM was. Firstly, in brand revitalisation with a Kmart campaign, internal marketing with a Bank of Queensland campaign, and new brand product and service launch with a campaign for Sanitarium around Weet-Bix. Monzi, welcome. From my side, I'm very interested. I saw some of those last year as a judge. Do you take the same sort of approach across all of the campaign submissions you do?
Hi, Sean, and hi, everyone there. Actually, that is an interesting question. And in a sense, I guess we do, because if you look at all the 3 entries of ours from last year, they're all driven by a central organising idea. And essentially, that, I guess, is an expression of the brand purpose, but it's creatively expressed. So, for example, for Bank of Queensland, it's possible to love a bank. Let's just prove it. For Kmart, we make low prices irresistible, and that promise comes through in absolutely everything they do. And with Sanitarium, we were welcoming people back to Weet-Bix, based on their view as a company that, Weet-Bix as a cereal should be absolutely accessible to everybody. It doesn't matter if you're gluten-free. So their launch of gluten-free Weet-Bix was also something which built the brand and built their belief in accessibility. So coming back to that organising idea, it's quite interesting because the organising idea was not only the campaign line, it was also the idea that drives all those 3 brands in the long term, not only in terms of their external communications, but their internal marketing. So you'll notice that, for example, for Bank of Queensland, we entered that for the internal award, whereas the others were more externally focused. But, the commonality with all 3 was that the idea drove internal staff behaviour and enabled them to create the experience, which we then communicated externally. So, yes, if you like, that there was absolutely a commonality in the approach to all of those. Now, I would say that, we certainly approached all those 3 brands, using an organising idea in the long term. But if, for example, that has not been your approach necessarily, and that hasn't been the way you've driven the brand over the year, you might have been much more campaign specific as opposed to thinking about a long-term brand idea. But even if you don't have that organising idea, it's really, really important to have a central theme which you can carry through, like a really great strong thread that allows you to write an entry which is incredibly cohesive, tells a great story, is quite compelling. So my advice in that respect is, and it's something that we did with all our entries, was before you even start to do your writing, write a really, really tight summary based on that theme. So getting that exact summary right and writing the right story will save a lot of time afterwards. And in fact, it saves you rewriting entries, even if you've got all the data right, if you haven't got the story that runs through, then, it requires a lot more work afterwards.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sean, that was a long answer.
No, it was a great answer. It was very good. I didn't introduce myself properly in terms of background, and I see there's no slide on me. I'm a former marketing director of Ernst & Young, and if you work for accountants as I did, they're very, very keen on return on investment metrics. Accountants love measuring finances, as everybody could probably imagine. Monzi, second question for you on the metrics and return on investment side. When do you sort of start collecting data? Is that a challenge? Give us a feel for that. It's obviously critical in an award submission, and we're going to talk about it more, but what's the approach at BWM?
I think essentially, and I think it's true for everybody, whether you're agent side or client side, that ROI measurement has to begin even before you start. So ensuring that you set, the right sort of goals, that you've got all everything in place in order to measure it. So it needs to be a collaborative effort. If there's an agency involved, yes, the agency, but certainly with the client, the research, the sales, all of that data needs to be, there and in place and ready to measure before you even start, so that you can actually track those objectives. So clearly it's something that starts early, and, you can't, at the end of the day, try and start writing an entry and without all the results in place. And in fact, we always tend to collect the results before we even begin an entry, because unless you know that you really have robust data that builds your objectives and proves them, then, there's really no point. And in fact, it's a discussion that we've had even between the judges the participants in the webinar just now, that it's really, really important to make sure that you're submitting the right entries, where you really believe in it and it's really quite tight. The other thing is, when it comes to ROI, I think that the most important thing is that the results, whatever you show, because we know that it's not always possible to reveal all the results, but ensure that what you do show is in context. So make sure that people understand that it's a good result, which is why, for example, share data is often a better measure than pure sales data, because at least it contextualizes your results within the category. And likewise, ROI is great, but, is it really good? Is that good? It's always got to be relative to your size or to the marketplace, so that people understand just how good it is when you're making a case.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. And 3 awards. You obviously know what you're talking about. That's great. I'll turn now to our second participant, Nicole Jenkins, Managing Director of the Hub Communications. Nicole, based in WA, won last year the Corporate Social Responsibility category with a campaign around emerging Aboriginal artists. And Nicole, I believe that was a government client. It was a fantastic entry, and I do recall judging it. From your side, challenges around government, and were there sort of objectives aligned with the sorts of submission you were making? Were they less commercial? Can you give us a feel for that?
Yeah. Hi everyone. Thanks for inviting me along to share our story. It's fantastic. Yes, government can tend to be more conservative, particularly when it comes to things like social media and that sort of thing. So I guess one of the things we needed to articulate in our award submission is that innovation and stretching those boundaries a little bit from a marketing perspective needs to be held in the context of the project and who the client was. So for us, creating a Facebook page, whilst for many organisations isn't overly momentous, for this project, it was huge, particularly when you're working in an area that's culturally sensitive as well, being the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander sector. So, yeah, definitely we had challenges, but I think one of the things that we tried to articulate in our award submission was those challenges and how we convinced or tried to, I guess, move the client through to trying different things, but then providing the evidence to show, well, yeah, they actually did work and they were really good and we should do them again for these reasons. That's the return on investment, or part of it anyway.
That's great. And obviously, social responsibility, is probably slightly different from some of the more commercial categories. Do you and does the Hub take a different approach when you're submitting in that category from, say, Marcom's business to consumer sort of submission? What's your thinking?
Yeah, I think it's no different. We all have projects or clients that sometimes they don't want to measure it, funnily enough, and sometimes they do. I guess from our perspective, being an agency, we would only submit if we could actually measure appropriately right from the word go at the start, not obviously at the end. So we would only put award submissions through where we know we've actually done thorough and robust research to actually provide the evidence on return on investment. And I believe it doesn't make a difference what the category is. The return on investment needs to be very clear from a financial and a non-financial perspective in actually sharing the story and the measurements and why they were good for the context of that project. I mean, Revealed, from memory, had a 10% increase in sales. Now, from a commercial perspective, that may not seem like a lot, but for a range of Aboriginal art centres throughout the state in WA, that was actually pretty big, and in a depressed market. So I think it comes down to the context, but to answer the question, no, return on investment should be exactly the same no matter what category you're in.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with that. I was asking a bit about Dorothy Dixer because I think, well, from a judging point of view, and we'll get to this later, and Nicole, I know you've been a judge, so I'm sure you'd agree with this, you do need metrics in order to validate the success of a campaign, and those can be financial and they can be market shares and whatever. So it doesn't really matter which category. So that's really good to hear too in terms of approach, I suppose the issues are slightly different, but in terms of putting in on a great campaign, it is quite similar in the way you approach it. So that's good. We'll move along. I'd like to introduce our third panellist. Philip Stork is the Marketing Director of Queensland Health. Philip and Queensland Health won last year in experiential and brand experiences, and the campaign was around smoking, specifically called "If You Smoke, Your Future's Not Pretty." And as you would imagine, if you didn't see the campaign, there was some fantastic sort of and pretty confronting material produced around that. Philip, I suppose interesting that a lot of this is long-term behaviour change stuff, and there's been a lot of work done in the area and a lot of great work over the years. How do you make the decision to put in for an award, and what's your sort of approach inside the organisation to make it happen?
So thank you very much for that, Sean. One of the things we really think about before we move into any of these campaigns is what is our market research telling us? So there has been a lot of work over the last 30 years in relation to reducing smoking rates. But when we look at a youth audience, which is what If You Smoke, Your Future's Not Pretty was targeted at, a young female audience, when we were doing the research, we found that really those approaches that have been used elsewhere, which were around the fear of cancer or the fear of long-term health risks, they don't really apply for young females. So we were looking at our market research and looking what's really going to work for this group, and that's probably how we chose to put this one, for example, in for an AMI, was it actually had some really unique insight in our market research. It was saying that young females are really not going to be motivated by those fear messages, but actually by messages around short-term and medium-term outcomes around whether it's going to make them attractive to the opposite sex. So that was a real, really interesting thing that came out of the consumer insight, the market research that we'd done. And then in terms of knowing whether it's a campaign that we'd want to put into for an award, for the AMI Awards, was really looking at knowing that we had that interesting insight, but also having really clear marketing objectives up front, and then looking at how the campaign performed. So if we had a campaign that just performed and met the objectives that we'd set, then we probably wouldn't put it in for award. But if we set some really clear marketing objectives and it blows those marketing objectives out the water, like this campaign did for us and really surprised us, then that's a campaign that we'd really want to make sure we're putting in for awards, because it's something that's performed incredibly well.
Yeah, good answer. Maybe now let's open up to the broader panel, and I'll kick off with our first question here, because we'll get to the judging side in a sec. But I think at a very practical level, people are now putting finishing touches to submissions, and some potentially aren't even starting with them, or are just making a start and panicking about dates. You've all been award winners last year. What are your comments on the time frame to submit a good campaign, and when you need to be putting in the work, and what it takes, I guess, to get it all together? Let's go around the grounds again. Monty, do you have a feel for when and how you need to be acting?
Yeah, absolutely. I think at least a couple of months. I mean, and because the time always gets crunched, if you can start putting your timeline together, 3 months away, all the better. And then I think, it's also about getting the right people in place and lined up, so you've got a proofreader, for when you get down the line. You've got somebody who will actually, way before you get to that stage even, just have a read of the entry, let you know where they're falling asleep and where it's actually really exciting, or where there are a few discrepancies where they're getting lost. And then also making sure that if you are an agency, ensuring that obviously you've got time to serve the client sign off and you're not foisting it upon them at the last minute. So the more you can actually try and stick to that timeline and have a taskmaster ideally who will help you do that, I think the better.
Good answer. Nicole, what can you add to that?
We're obviously going to submit for a couple of awards this year. We started last month. That's not to say you can't start now, but I would definitely, I agree, give yourself plenty of time so you can do it in a non-stressful environment and actually have a real think about, okay, well, what really was the issue and what were the outcomes that we achieved here? Knowing that you have 2,000 words to articulate all of that, it is about refining, cutting back, editing to make sure that your messages are really sharp and on point and they answer the question that is actually being asked. So give yourself the time and the luxury to play around with it, and also develop all of the supporting materials in a way that it's really attractive for a judge to read. That's probably the best advice I could give anyone.
Very good. Thank you. Philip?
Yeah, I completely agree with what's been said already. I think for us, we always try and work to make sure that any sort of submission like this, we've given ourselves a couple of months in terms of in advance to think about how we want to position anything for an award. And because what you really want to do is go through and actually find out what's the core of this submission. What is it that actually makes this special? If you're doing it in the last week and you're throwing it all together, you don't really have the time to sit down and think about that and think about really what it is you want to actually pitch here. And then I guess for us, we actually have an approach where we will sit down and discuss it internally as a marketing team and actually go through and almost pitch it internally so that we can actually say, here are the things that are special about this. And then finally, the only thing I'd say is make sure that you've planned out the fact that you'll have all your data available for when you have your submission going in. So if you don't have all your data available, you may want to consider, is this the right time to do it, because am I giving this the best opportunity?
Excellent, thank you. That's great. So after that insight, and really valuable, I think, from all of the participants so far, and obviously pretty different backgrounds. We've got in-house, we've got agencies, different types of clients, different categories. So I think that's been fantastic. We're now going to move to the second phase of the webinar, which is about the judging itself. I, for my sins, have been head judge for the last couple of years, doing so again this year. So the plan is for the panel to throw questions at me about everything they ever wanted to know about judging, and particularly while they were doing their submission, everybody sort of thinks, oh, wonder what the judges are going to think of this, or how should we approach this, or whatever. I do have a bit of an ally amongst the panel. Nicole was a judge last year, so be interesting in the course of our discussion maybe to get some of her perspectives on what it was like to be on the other side of the fence. So that's the plan. Opening up, maybe we go round the grounds again. Monzi, do you want to open up with a question? Or have we lost her? Monzi? We might have lost her for a sec.
Sorry, beg your pardon. I had to put that on mute just for a second. So yeah, I mean, I'm really interested to know just more generally about what the process is. Are there a couple of rounds? You know, do people get together and discuss it? And yeah, if you could just talk that through, that would be awesome. Thanks, Sean. Sure,
that's fine. So Rania's already mentioned there are a number of judges, 110 I think it was she mentioned. That's a lot of judges. But we have a lot of categories, and in the aim for this year, as it has been in past years, is to get every category properly judged by a good panel of judges. The way that plays out is generally to have 3 or 4 judges on each category. They're chosen in advance, briefed. They're all experienced marketing practitioners themselves, possibly academics, with good marketing credentials. Every category tends to have, the aim is to have every category with a judge who is experienced and has done it for a few years. So that's effectively, I suppose, a mentor judge, as they're called internally. What happens then is those judges get sent all of the submissions in their category, and generally the mentor judge will take a facilitation role around making sure people have the right materials, that the time frames are going to work for everyone, etc. And then it's a matter of each individual taking a look at the entries, forming opinions around them, and also agreeing with the group the approach they're going to take. The aim with all of it is to keep very true to the awards criteria as presented on directly from the AMI. So as the criteria that everybody is responding to is obviously what needs to be judged against. So that, with that in mind, judges will individually look at the entries. Then there's some sort of forum where they'll come together, talk about initial ideas. Either they'll rank in advance, or it'll be rankings and discussion in a central forum. The bottom line is they'll come out with final scores after some collaboration, and that could be a teleconference. Judges may be sort of spread around the country. Some categories do need a lot more discussion than others when the scoring is sort of all over the place. Other categories, we find that the 3 or 4 judges are very much aligned in their opinions, and not much discussion and debate is required. So as I say, but the main points to get across are it's quite a strong panel judging each category. There is individual looking at submissions, and then a get together around discussing scores and discussing who ultimately is going to be winning. And obviously we've got national awards, but we've also got the state awards. That's all done in the one forum, and then the results are submitted back to the AMI. And sometimes there may be another round, depending on how close the scores are and how much discussion's required. If you've got a very difficult separation of two or three entries that are absolutely top notch, then there may be further discussion. But judges' decisions are usually final. I've not come across too many circumstances where anything gets changed after the judges. And as I say, that's generally the process. There we go. So that's the answer to that one.
Thank you.
Any others from your side?
Sorry, for me specifically?
Yeah. Or should we go around again? Nicole, do you want to take the floor?
Yeah, I've always been intrigued as to know how important the word count is, because it's quite specific. So would you be able to answer that one for me?
Absolutely. I guess first thing to say is it is important because there are often large numbers of entries in each category, and the judges are having to do a lot of work to get through each entry. So I would say it is important, it's there for a reason. Keeping to it will count in the favour of entrants. And also, as I say, it'll mean that entries are easier to get across, easier to understand, and you're making the judges' lives easier. Do we specifically count the words ourselves? No is the answer, but it is pretty obvious when somebody has way exceeded the word count. And we do get some submissions, and I believe, Nicole, that was an area you focused on yourself. We do get some submissions that actually give us a word count and prove to us that they are inside the word count. And I would say that's a positive. That all of the criteria are there for a reason, and if you can keep within the criteria, definitely that's a positive. If you're not quite in the word count and you're 5 words over, are we going to be like a government procurement process and disqualify people? No is the answer, but as I say, it could only count in your favour to keep within the word count, or at least close to the word count.
Great.
There we go. Thank you.
I think you can kind of go along the lines of the uni policy, where if it's above 10% or below 10%, then it's
yeah. I guess bottom line, not exact science, and often the submissions are also submitted via PDF, so it's much more difficult to do a proper word count on a PDF. But as I say, hopefully that gives you enough insight, and certainly if you're within 5%, you're not going to be ruled out. There we go. Philip, question from you.
So coming from an in-house marketing team, interested to know from your perspective whether judges are looking for award submissions from agency side, from in-house side. Is there a preference from you guys? How would you like those award submissions to come in? Are they best to come through the agency or come from in-house?
The answer is it absolutely doesn't matter. I've judged for a number of years, and I'd be very hard pressed to remember, even last year, which submissions were agency, which submissions were in-house. It's irrelevant, and I think you need to view this as the campaign is being judged. It doesn't matter who's sitting behind the campaign, whether it is an agency, whether it is a client. I mean, the aim is for it to be a very close collaboration anyway. And, the ultimate submission needs to focus on the campaign and not the interplay between the client and the agency, or multiple agencies in some cases. And as I say, from a judge's perspective, irrelevant from our side, and hopefully not memorable, because that would be a distraction if we get a bit hung up on who was doing what in the space of the campaign. That's actually an interesting one for Nicole too. Nicole, when you were judging last year, was that something that crossed your mind?
No, not at all. And like you, I totally can't remember who they actually came from. And it really, it doesn't matter. It's actually about the story, the content, the measurements, the metrics. It's about taking us through that journey of how you identified the issue, what the solution was, what were the results, and what were the outcomes. It doesn't matter who that comes from, because the story should be the same.
Yeah. I tell you, the one time it is noticeable is at the final awards presentation. And you've got an agency like BWM Dentsu who get called up 3 or 4 or whatever number of times, and then everybody kind of goes, oh, they're doing something right. So with full credit to Monzi and her team, that's the one time it would be evident. But again, and Monzi would be the first to say, it's important to involve the client in the success as well. And I'm sure, it's usually a mutual credit that happens there, and often the client is speaking along with the agency to accept the award.
Absolutely. Believe me, we did invite them. They just couldn't make it on this occasion. So it was ever so slightly embarrassing. I think we came up once there, but I think because we went to the awards in Melbourne versus Sydney, so it also depended if they could make it. So it was absolutely a collaborative process in every case.
Love it. So should we do another round? How are we going on time? 20 minutes to go. Should we do another round of questions? Monzi, do you have any others?
For me, it was really understanding the process, which I think you've taught through. I guess because there are quite a few judges in the first place, coming back to this point about concision and telling a good story, I always have a theory that, it's so important to write something that is engaging and gripping, a story that people want to read and want to feel part of. Because obviously I understand that, in the first place, there are a lot of entries to plough through. So the more you can actually stand out through your entry, just as we try and do, through communications when we're in the public sphere, it feels like that's the right way to go. I mean, would you say that's important?
Yeah, 100%. It's you're putting forward excellent campaigns to a bunch of marketing people and asking them to rate them. So definitely creativity, innovation, engaging things, telling a good story. And also there is that issue of keeping the flow and consistency right. I certainly in the past have seen entries that, you sort of intuitively think there's a good campaign behind the entry, but the story is sort of not well told and it's hard to keep track and there are things happening there and, the categories are... the various segments of the campaign are not sort of flowing nicely. And I think in some cases that's a symptom of the material is coming from another submission that was made, 2 months ago, and it's just been repurposed and not repurposed very well. When you hit that sort of circumstance, it's very difficult from a judging perspective to rate that submission highly. So while you think, based on your experience, that they might have some good stuff, if they're not telling the story well, that's certainly a big issue. And I suppose the other side, we've talked about metrics on the call a little bit, but the metrics have to sit well with the story as well and back it up, and that's the purpose of metrics. Return on investment and all the other metrics behind a campaign. If it's a great story and it's highly innovative and creative and all that sort of thing, that's terrific, and that'll certainly impress the judges. But the story has to include how successful it was. And obviously, when you look at the criteria, we've got those 4 categories. Results, you're marking, 30% of the score, and also then the value to the organisation is an additional 30%, the long-term value. Both of those need pretty good support from metrics because there are going to be other campaigns that are submitted in that category that will have good stories and good metrics behind them, you would imagine. So if yours doesn't, then you're going to be missing out.
I guess that makes sense because ultimately what we're telling are success stories. So we've got to weave in the success metrics and almost celebrate what we've done. And I think, that enthusiasm probably also comes across when you're telling it and telling your story.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Nicole, any questions from you?
Yeah, I was interested in your thoughts as to what to include in the supporting material and what to include in the actual submission itself, and your advice as to how that could be structured for people when they're thinking about what to put in and what not to include and put into supporting material? Yeah.
It's a good question. And I must say, we do sometimes get submissions, and you may have seen them yourself when you were judging last year,
yes,
where you've got the submission and then you've got a mountain of supporting material. And some people choose to send every piece of creative, every response on social media, all that sort of stuff. And I don't mean to sound like I'm rolling my eyes, but sometimes you do feel like there's an absolute avalanche of information. And look, that can be great, and it is good to have some supporting material. I would say your submission is the number one thing to worry about, and the story, how it sits together, the metrics, all that sort of thing are very important. If you've got a graphical, campaign that's got some nice creative, and that's part of the story, and I'm sure it would be, I would be inclined to include a hand-picked selection of the best bits in the submission. I wouldn't include lots and lots of stuff, and certainly we get some submissions that have mountains of appendices as well, and makes them enormous files and can make them unwieldy. I would say the best submissions get a selection of the best of the campaign all in the one place and have it nicely laid out, and so it's a good looking document. Judges do, though, certainly look at the supporting materials, and if you've got some great supporting materials and you're thinking, look, there's a lot of creative here, we're not going to be able to put much of it in the submission, will the judges be looking at the supporting materials as well? Absolutely. And we do emphasize to all of the judges, you really need to look at all of the stuff that's been submitted. So definitely that's in the judges' minds, and they will do that. As I say, though, I think like anybody who's marking anything, if you're facing 30 or 40 files on the one submission, it's a stretch to open every single one of those attached supporting files. So as I say, if there's a way to make the judges' lives easier, put them in one single, a separate file of stuff, or make them multiple files of a certain type, the social media separate from, some of the graphic design creative stuff, that's great. There's no set answer to it, but as I say, I would say try and keep the submission looking good and having a flavour for some of the supporting materials, and keep the supporting materials in an easy-to-access format. And I think also probably a good way to do it, and some of the panellists have alluded to this already, get it proofread, get people, complete outsiders, giving an objective view on how the submission looks and fits together, and send them all the stuff, get them to pretend they're a judge, see how easy it is for them to get across everything, to access everything, to have an understanding of it, because as I say, I think that's pretty important. And Nicole, you've obviously judged and you submitted last year. Do you have a response to that? What are your views?
We personally separated the supporting material, put them all in one document, and only had a selection of the material in one document. And we kept our award submission quite clean, so it was easy for a judge to read and follow the storyline. But doing it this year, we might put in some of the designed up elements of the key metrics and key results into that submission without making it busy or complex. I've judged a few submissions that have made it too busy and made it too hard to follow. So I think the cleaner it is and the easier it is to follow, like you've said, the story in the actual submission is really important. So if someone's saying to you that's proofing it, it's just too hard to follow, take some of that out and put it into the supporting documents, because we do look at it. If there's a mountain load of stuff, I'll be very surprised if everyone looks at every single thing. But if it's in one document and it's nicely laid out and it's easy to read and absorb and it backs up your award submission, I think that's the best way to go. So I agree.
Thank you. That's great. We're going to get to people's questions in a sec. I'll throw to Philip in case he's got one more. Before I do that, though, I wouldn't also mind covering something that Philip was alluding to previously, and I think it's good to have an answer to it. Philip, you were talking about agency versus client and who does the submission. The other thing that often comes up, and I'm often asked about the awards, is if a small organisation wanted to enter, will they just automatically be not stand a chance against a Qantas or a Coca-Cola or a Ford or some of these really big organisations? And whether that's a small agency or whether that's a small company or a small government department with a small budget, the answer to that is absolutely not. There is no favouritism that's shown towards any of the big brands. The aim with judging is to get the judges to leave all their preconceptions at the door. They may have seen a particular campaign from a Qantas or a Coca-Cola, think it's very impressive themselves, but really the aim is to have them look at the submission by Coca-Cola or Qantas or whoever it is and judge it on its merits. So if it's a fabulous submission that's beautifully put together and tells the story well and has great metrics and can demonstrate terrific success, then it'll obviously be in the running and a great submission. So in that context, so would a great submission that tells a great story from a very small organisation from a small state, Tasmania, South Australia, you name it. The aim of judging is to put everybody on an equal footing and judge what we're submitted, and also recognising that some campaigns have smaller budgets than others. And we're judging marketing, we're not judging advertising here. So, obviously in advertising you can go over the top and get very creative, and the bigger budgets tend to have much more flashy, exciting stuff. Marketing is about the power of the idea. It's not about the power of the visuals and the splash made on TV advertising. So I couldn't emphasise that strongly enough. Encourage everybody with a great story that's demonstrated a lot of success to enter. And we've also got a history in recent years. Rania talked about this at the start, where we've had a small chain of pet stores beat Coca-Cola to the top award. We've had a farmer from Queensland with a wonderful sort of milk product beat some very big names just because marketing had transformed his business, and that's what the submission was all about, and now he's incredibly successful. So, as I say, it's not about the budget, bottom line. Philip, over to you.
Yeah, sorry, my question was really around how the judging works and how how a panel of judges look at materials, and what's the process? Because I think when you put an award application in, you want to have an idea of how it's going to be viewed. Are they going to the panel going to get together and view it in a meeting, or are they going to do a teleconference, or do they do them individually and then come together and do some sort of making sure that they're cross-referencing against each other?
Yeah. So Philip answered a bit of this with Monzi already, so I'll just summarise, because her question was quite similar. I understand it's, that is you automatically, when you're putting in an award submission, think, well, how is this going to be judged, and what are the expectations for my beautiful piece of work, and hopefully it is a beautiful piece of work. Yes, so the judges do look at all of the stuff as I've mentioned. It depends on whether it's in the same room all together all at once, or whether it's individually and then they come together. And as I said before, usually because judges are spread around the country, they will look at things individually and score things individually. But I can give everybody absolute assurance that they're working off the same score sheet, if you like. So the judging platform that we use has scoring built into it, and everybody's putting their scores into the same sort of platform, if you like. And also the judges do communicate around the approach. And they might do it in advance of the judging, or they might do it after they've judged, but to make sure that there's been absolute consistency applied. So, and that's also the importance of the mentor judge that I mentioned earlier. So the leader of that panel needs to make sure that each of the entries has had a fair hearing, that none of the judges has been biased by some of their background or preconceptions or whatever, that nobody has a conflict of interest. That's another one. You sometimes get marketing professionals that have worked for a particular organisation or worked on a specific campaign, or that are too close. They're best friends, the marketing director of the organisation. We need those people, obviously, to step back from that award, declare a conflict of interest, and then not judge it. And that's why we have fairly large panels, to make sure that that's covered. So as I say, what we're aiming for is consistency, rigorous approach, making sure all the materials are covered, and then all of the judges agreeing that the final award winners are indeed the award winners that they're happy with. Sometimes judges do get very passionate, so they need to agree to disagree, and usually it's a majority wins. On the very, very rare occasion, there's an extra moderator needed to resolve a dispute between judges over submissions. And that, again, is a healthy process. If you've got such great submissions that people, that the judges are feeling, one should definitely win over another one, then, and somebody else takes a counterpoint of view, resolving that is important. But as I said, judges' decisions are final too, so we don't go back on anything, but sometimes in reaching that, the list of winners, there'll be a process followed. So hopefully that answers things. Yep. Rania, over to you. Do you have any particular questions?
Yeah, a couple of the registrants for the webinar today have sent through some questions, some of which I could probably answer as well. Jody and Sarah have actually asked about word count, which we touched on before, and if it includes supporting material. So the answer to that, it's definitely exclusive to the executive summary, which is the PDF which is submitted. The supporting material is in addition to the executive summary. And Kira Jade has actually followed on from that and asked if you're able to supply video files and if there's preferred format for those supporting materials. So,
so I'll answer that.
Sean, yeah.
Yeah, so just to reiterate, definitely no, word count doesn't apply to supporting materials. In terms of all types of files, graphic files, video files, all that sort of thing, as long as they're easily openable, on a Microsoft or an Apple platform, that's fine. If it's a sort of way out file format, judges are generally not graphic designers, they're not video experts, so they're going to be using the sorts of technology that you'd standardly see in an office environment. So I'd stick to those formats unless there's a very good reason not to. And if there is a reason not to, and there's a format that's, I don't know, really fantastic Flash, PowerPoint, some sort of presentation, don't know, talk to the AMI. I'd talk to the central office and just see if there's a way that, that special format can be prepared for judges so they can view it properly. Bear in mind the AMI's decision-making will be around the fairness to everybody else. So if you've got a presentation you want to do that includes fireworks, does that mean that everybody else is disadvantaged because judges are going to a central location to watch a firework display? So in their minds, they're going to have to think through that. I'm just going to an extreme example here, but as I say, hopefully that answers the question. And from a logical perspective, that's the way we view it from the AMI.
Yeah. Thanks, Sean. So Olivia has actually asked, measuring awareness on a short shoestring budget can be very difficult, especially for a non-for-profit. Is a simple metric like increasing inquiry rates enough for a submission?
Yeah, look, it's probably the best information that you've got put in the submission. Absolutely, if it's a small budget, judges will understand it, particularly if it's marketing on a shoestring. You're not going to have lots of agencies and market researchers crawling all over the campaign, developing terrific metrics. We understand that. So I think use the best you've got. I've seen campaigns win where all they're talking about is social media responses, but they've told a terrific story around that, and they've proven up some good metrics that they've been able to present. Sometimes it is also an issue of confidentiality around metrics. Some big brands are very concerned about anybody outside their organisation having their data. Again, we understand that. We do get all judges to sign a confidentiality agreement and make sure that information doesn't, get shared anywhere. But as I say, there are still some organisations that spend millions of dollars on their marketing efforts, and this is competitively sensitive information, and they're not able to achieve a legal sign-off to provide it. So again, we understand that. I think it's a matter of telling the best story possible, and we certainly don't have a history of only the campaigns that had complete metrics were the winners. That's not the case at all.
Thanks, Sean. Now, Bryony has asked, how do you compare different industries within the same category? For example, activewear versus accounting, both up for the Best Campaign of the Year award.
Yeah, so with difficulty is the short answer. And you think about the individual categories, but you also think about the Campaign of the Year. Campaign of the Year takes all of the winners from all of the categories and puts them side by side to pick the campaign of the year, it's a very difficult exercise. And, you look at a pet store versus Coca-Cola, you look at a farmer up in Queensland, a dairy farmer versus, I don't know who the brands were that year. But, it is difficult. What you're looking at is the criteria and, how the campaign has performed against the criteria and how the story is told, whether it is genuine marketing excellence, all come into play. And really, the principles of marketing, whether it's the experiential stuff, whether it's corporate and social responsibility, the principles of marketing still apply, and that's what we're looking at, And again, we're using criteria that hopefully will get everybody onto the same platform, and the judges thinking in the same direction and approaching each award entry the same. As I say, whether it's activewear, Coca-Cola, Qantas, you name it.
And just to follow on from that as well, I think it's really important just to keep that consistency with your submission in terms of making sure it's in line with what each of the categories are asking for. But thanks, Sean. So, yes, there are a couple more. So Marina and another registrant have asked if there are previous winner submissions available online, just as a reference point.
No. The answer is no, because a lot of most of the campaign entries are submitted, all of them are submitted on a confidential basis, and most of the submitters are keen for stuff to stay confidential. So unfortunately, no, but there are certainly plenty of successful agencies that have won awards, and I know Nicole and Monzi would be delighted to have a prospective new client wanting advice on awards and potentially to do some work for them down the track. I've certainly also consulted to various clients on how to approach entries. There's no restriction on judges doing that, and there's no restriction on marketing consultants giving advice that may be part of the AMI. I know a number of people I sit on the New South Wales Council with have also been involved, and those are small pieces of advice, or they're larger. I do go back to the conflict of interest side. Certainly, if I work with any client on a submission or do any marketing work with a client that becomes an award submission, I need to declare that conflict of interest very early on, as do any of my colleagues. So as I say, there's certainly advice and help to be had. I would also go to the AMI Central Office and see if they can give some pointers, if particularly we're talking marketing on a shoestring or a smallish campaign and you need some advice on how to submit it. Potentially they may be able to give some time there, but obviously do bear in mind that they're handling quite a big workload too. But I know there are some questions that come in, particularly around, is the way this is presented going to be okay, or is the file format okay, or whatever. And as I say, then I would also go to the rest of your organisation or other advisors and get people to review and edit and input advice and all that sort of thing.
Thanks, Sean. And I guess another really good reference point for each of you would be the 2015 e-book, which is available if you go to the AMI website through the recognition tab and click 2015 winners, and you can actually go through. And while it won't show what the entries were or the format or anything, it'll just give you an overview so you can understand, the best campaigns and who won. So that's always good to look through. Now, Olivia has just asked when the cutoff for submissions are. That's the 3rd of June, so don't miss it. And another question she's posed, Sean, is how important is it to describe the effect of the campaign on the organisation as a whole, and are economic threats to the organisation relevant?
Oh, very good question, Olivia. How important is it to describe the effect of the campaign on the organisation as a whole? It depends. I mean, we're talking, if it's a transformational marketing campaign and, the organisation has really taken leaps and bounds on the back of great marketing, then it is very relevant. in terms, some of the categories are to do with internal marketing and, how internal communications have been handled, then absolutely it's very relevant. If there's been cultural change and all that sort of stuff, well, that category is all about, how marketing is working within the organisation, not out in the commercial marketplace. So absolutely it's very relevant there. That said, if a commercial campaign has been highly successful and achieved terrific results, and there's long-term brand value, that's the point of the fourth category the fourth of the criteria in the awards sort of setup. Long-term value and brand impact over the long term are certainly very important, but whether that's to do with the rest of the organisation as a whole and culture and attractiveness as an employer brand and whatever else is not really sometimes relevant. So as I say, I'd be focusing on the campaign and the success it's produced from a marketing perspective, and interpret that success in as the story depends. So in some cases, and as I say, I've talked a bit about the farmer up in Queensland and also the pet supplies company last year. Their marketing campaign had been business transformational and given them a massive strategic advantage, as well as being a terrific marketing campaign with marketing results. Then it's very relevant. But in some cases, it may not be relevant and it's not an essential. So that's the first question. The second question was, are economic threats to the organisation relevant? Horses for courses again, I'd say. When you do your SWOT analysis, some of it's going to be very relevant from a marketing perspective. Some of it isn't. And, I think if you're looking at market conditions and the results in, say, a depressed market, so economy's been struggling, the campaign is all about, selling houses in Sydney. The market's taken a downturn. Success may be a 10% return on investment, whereas 2 years ago when the housing market was booming, it might have been 150%. It's about how you tell the story, and I think it's also it's about trying to benchmark against the market if you can, or benchmark internally, or benchmark against the past. And we've certainly had plenty of winners in the past that have achieved success in a depressed market and been able to convey that through their awards submission. Challenger Financial Services was our program of the year a few years ago, following the GFC, and their success had been pretty stellar, but they did concede themselves that they'd been even more successful a couple of years previously, but they'd been hard hit like everybody else had in the GFC. So as I say, hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks, Sean. Olivia just said thank you as well.
Pleasure, Olivia.
So I think that pretty much concludes our webinar for today. I would like to thank Monty, Nicole, Philip and Sean for joining us today. Thank you again, especially because they did take the time out of their long weekend as well to prepare for this, so thank you. So just to wrap up, we do have just a summary of top entry tips and questions. I'm hoping that is up on your screen. And if there are any more questions that you have for awards, you can send them through via email to awards@ami.org.au, and we'll come back to you. The AMI will come back to you. So thank you, everyone, and we'll send out the recording for this as well as the slides in the next couple of days.